Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Donald Wallenfang. Welcome to this live stream on the topic of Edmund Husserl's concept of givenness, the phenomenological concept of givenness. It's something that we cannot discuss too much for phenomenology because it gives so much, gives a surplus. It's, I think, the most central concept for phenomenology, next to the phenomenological reduction. It is the prize for carrying out the reduction effectively, carrying out the reduction well. What is the prize but givenness? So I want to work to share my screen here and talk about this together. Again, taking from my 2017 book, Dialectical Anatomy of the Eucharist, an etude of in phenomenology, forward by Jean-Luc Marion. And the chapter of Marion's work. But in order to understand the work of Jean-Luc Marion, we of course have to understand the work of Edmund Husserl, Martin Heidegger, and the trajectory that he places himself within in his book Reduction and Givenness is that of these two predecessors, Husserl, Heidegger, and then Marion claiming to calibrate the phenomenological reduction to a third degree beyond what's happening in Husserl and Heidegger. But to understand Marion's donative reduction or reductionist to givenness itself, we have to understand Husserl's reduction to objectivity, Heidegger's reduction to the self manifestation of being, and then Marion, his claim to a more radical reduction to givenness. So I want to back things up once again and really get into some of Husserl's texts on how he understands the concept of givenness so that we better can understand phenomenology and how to do it. So let me share my screen and continue to offer some different words of reflection. Okay, so hopefully you're able to see things and with the screen share, because in previous videos it seemed to be a little off, but I'm seeing that it's looking pretty good there. So again, what we're talking about today is the phenomenological concept of givenness. Givenness. And in German, the word is gegeben. In French, the word is donation. Donation. Um, and so, what is givenness? In order to get into the concept, I want to refer to some of Marion's definitions of the term, descriptions of the term, and then move into Husserl's. But Marion sets up a nice general description. Uh, so, for phenomenology, the question is, why does givenness serve as such a key and indispensable lens through which to view phenomena, so to speak? It is because, Marion says, that givenness alone is absolute, free, and without condition, precisely because it gives, es gibt. And we already have somewhat of a concept of givenness in the work of Immanuel Kant in the late 18th century. In his Critique of Pure Reason, uh, he writes that if a cognition is to have objective reality, that is, if it is to refer to an object and have in that object its signification and meaning, then the object must be capable of being given in some way. So key. Even there in Kant, we have an anticipation of Husserl's concept of givenness. And it is really where Husserl's getting it. But Husserl develops it so much more. But even the sense of an object being given with an experience. Kant goes on to say to give an object, if this is not again to mean to be given it only indirectly, but is to mean rather to exhibit it directly in intuition. Okay, so Kant, say Kant, are you a phenomenologist? He's a precursor. So Immanuel Kant, he's talking about uh, an object being given. How? He says not only indirectly, but being given directly in intuition. To think about an object of experience being given directly in intuition. What is giving the object, if not the object itself? The givenness of the object. It shows itself to me, it appears to me as the perceiver, beginning with the five senses, but the unity of these senses that we call perception in general. I perceive this object giving itself to me, at least appearing to me visually, tangibly, its texture, its size, its weight, its color, its form, and all of these attributes of the object. But for philosophy, we're thinking about the eidetic structures of experience, uh, meaning, or the noetic structures of experience, both these kinds of things. Eidetic in terms of the formal givenness, the essential givenness of a thing, of a phenomenon, and noetic, what's going on with the conscious reception of the phenomenon. So in phenomenology, we also see this distinction between noema, and again, this is rooted in the Greek term nous, that means mind or thought. So the noema is that which is being cognized, that which is being thought, whether it's an object, an idea, a feeling, a sensation, a question, whatever is being cognized, the content of cognition is the noema, and it's coordinated with, as it gives itself to, uh, noesis, which is, we could say, cognition itself. Cognition, thinking, conscious receptivity of phenomena. Noesis, the act of cognizing. But what is being thought about are um, is the noema uh, that gives itself to be thought, to be received directly in intuition. So this is the key again. And if we were to draw a picture of what's going on here in terms of uh, phenomenology, again we have the human subject. And I'll just draw a stick figure to represent the human subject. The human subject uh, is where this noesis is taking place, where the cognition is taking place, not outside the subject, but inside the subject. And the noema is what gives itself to the subject all the way to the inside. Uh, so the noema, so it gives itself to the subject for the noesis, the conscious cognition of the subject. So we have the thing in itself, the noema, and we have the human subject, subjectivity. Intuition is how the thing in itself, the object in this case, or the phenomenon, gives itself to the subject. Now, in Kant, he's not all out a phenomenologist because Kant wants to draw the distinction between what he calls the noumenon, coordinating the concept noema with noumenon, and the phenomenon is what's perceived in noesis. But Husserl says, no, there's no caesura, there's no hiatus, there's no gap between what I'm experiencing and the thing itself. There's a unity of the givenness. So Kant at least is detecting that there's a givenness. This is the direction, the structure of experience, perception, understanding, eventually. Uh, but Kant, in his idealism, says that the mind is dealing at best with phenomena distinct from the things in themselves. But Husserl says no, there's no caesura, there's no hiatus, there's no gap between the noumenon and the phenomenon. They are one and the same. What we experience is what gives itself. What gives itself all the way into the heart of our consciousness. And so there is not just an apparition of the thing that we're working with inside our minds, but the thing itself and its givenness gives itself all the way into the territory of our conscious life. Our spiritual life, essentially, it's not just a matter of what neurons are doing in the biology of the brain, the chemistry of the brain. All of this biology and chemistry is a medium to receive uh, givenness itself. Is givenness itself an object? No, it's an idea, it's a concept. Does the concept have reality, objective reality? Yes, it does. It's a spiritual object per se. And an idea is real, and it can't be reduced to something made up of atoms. So Husserl himself, in his later work, will get a bit more um, of an idealism happen because he takes so seriously the objectivity of subjectivity and the objectivity of uh, the eidos, of the eidetic, of the idea, of the essence, of the form. And for Husserl, when um, we're talking about uh, this givenness, he's aiming at uh, immanent data of consciousness. And the immanent data of consciousness are uh, um, phenom- phenomenal, I'll say phenomenal essences. The immanent datum of a thing in itself is the essence, and the essences that make up the object, for example. So the pen, uh, blackness, silverness, smoothness, cylindricalness, extension, um, the particular shape, curvature, but all this the essences that comprise the givenness of the phenomenon. So metaphysics, classical metaphysics, wants to categorize the object quickly, put it in its box. Pen, you write with it. A tool, put it in that box, move on. Phenomenology wants to say, wait just a second. What gives? And it's more of a contemplative interaction, a contemplative encounter here. What gives? Oh, this is not just a pen, it has some print on it. Sacred Heart Major Seminary. And it has a coat of arms with a lion and the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And all of a sudden, the pen is very interesting. Oh my goodness. Food for contemplation. There's so much to be received here, and even the smoothness of the pen, it becomes much more generous hermeneutics. Wow, yeah, I appreciate the smoothness of the pen or the tacticity of where I can hold the pen, or the fact that it can serve as a stylus at the end, and it has this soft piece that allows me to draw pictures on a classroom screen. Classroom screen, by the way, is when I share my screen. It's a free online program called classroomscreen.com, where you can, if you're on a Zoom call or something, you can share your screen and type things, draw things. So highly recommend. And it is not a product promotion, just for your information, if you're wondering. But phenomenology enjoys this interaction that's going on, even with, we could say, an object. But for phenomenology at this point in its history, we don't want to even characterize this phenomenon as object so quickly. And at the same time, we don't want to drift into some fantasy world and call everything whatever we want, some nominalism or something, or relativize givenness as this ubiquitous, undifferentiated thing. No, it's not that either. There are distinctions being, but at the same time, it's the tension, it's a living tension and balance between the refusal to reduce the phenomenon according to some reductionistic natural attitude, where I characterize it too quickly, I don't appreciate all that it's giving, and I move on. And on the other extreme, something that would be like a movement toward a kind of relativism or even nihilism, where meaning unravels because it's all absorbed in this sea of generic givenness that makes somebody move into an ecstatic contemplation of the one or something in Neoplatonic fashion. It's not that either. It's not a radical idealism. It's not any kind of objective reductionism, material reductionism, even metaphysical reductionism. But phenomenology wants to go back to this innocent, naive encounter with the real as it gives itself, as uh, this polyphony of phenomena that comprise the real. So hopefully this is helping make more sense of what is Husserl trying to get at here as he's peeling back the layers of experience. And Husserl, in his book, The Idea of Phenomenology, his 1907 Göttingen lectures, talks about the difference between immanent data of consciousness and transcendent transcendent data uh, of um, I'm just going to say out there, outside of consciousness. So, in the case of this, my experience of this phenomenon in my hand, and again, it's not just the object in my hand; it's my hand in relation to the object, my eyes in relation to the object, my ears as I hear sounds as my fingers make contact with the object. Uh, I'm not going to go so far as taste, maybe smell, maybe not much givenness in terms of smell in this case. But in the case of the phenomenon giving itself in my hand, but in terms of what my nose is smelling in the room, my clothes, uh, the soap I use, whatever. Phenomenality includes all of this all at once. And so we don't flatten the world as in a kind of two-dimensional thing. Subject, object, subject. Phenomenology says that's a nice heuristic to begin to understand experience and make important distinctions in philosophy. But now we know too much. Thank you, Rene Descartes. Thank you, Emmanuel Kant. Thank you. all of these thinkers, Ludwig Wittgenstein in language games, we know too much to be naive in an ignorant way. But we also know too much to be too sophisticated in a non-naive way, because that also has its reductionisms. What phenomenology is trying to recuperate is that original naivete of the child and take it seriously. So again, Maurice Merleau-Ponty has a great quote about this in his article, What is Phenomenology? The whole effort of phenomenology, Merleau-Ponty says, is to recover this naive contact with the world and to give it at last a philosophical status. So again, philosophy does well to think about the experience of life as a child. Even as we get older, adults, uh, in our 40s and up, that there's something of the lived experience of the child that we should not lose. We need to continue to gather it up, to recuperate it, to let the child lead us in how to begin to philosophize with freshness, once again, with innocence, um, with a mature naivete that is there in the child, that is there in the mystic, that is there in the artist, that is there in the mother, that is there in the contemplative. So for Husserl, again, the structure of experience is such that there's immanent data of consciousness, which is what we're really after, these essences, the phenomenal essences of thinking themselves, that give themselves as themselves, that altogether make up the wholeness we call reality. But he differentiates between the immanent data of consciousness and the transcendent data of, how many inches is the object, how much does the object weigh, what is the molecular composition of the different parts of the object. All the stuff of natural science, great, has its place. But let us call all of this data transcendent data, exterior data, always questionable data, going back to Descartes and looking at the candle and the wax. Uh, but immanent data are more certain than transcendent. And so, further than Descartes, Husserl says not only do we have epistemological certainty with the bare fact that we think, even when we doubt, that we can't deny the certitude that we think, the cogito ergo sum, but also there's a certitude of the phenomena that gives itself as itself by itself. And so this is why he's after givenness, because givenness is a necessary and interior corollary to cognition. There's nothing to cognize without the phenomena. There's nothing there. We have a vacuum for thought without the phenomena. So we need to grant phenomenal givenness as much, if not more, epistemological certitude than noesis, than cognition, than consciousness. We need to go to the origin of experience. That is not subjectivity alone, but all that gives itself into the heart of the human subject and into the conscious life. So here we are then, thinking about Husserl and phenomenological givenness, the epoche, the reckoning of the natural attitude, Again, getting informed by this Kantian intuition about intuition, that we have the object being given directly in intuition, at least with Kant, even though he will end up idealizing the object and focusing on what's going on in the oasis. Um, but Husserl is, is trying to resurrect and let there be a renaissance of the things in themselves, away from the outcome of idealism and empiricism combining forces into psychologism and a relativization of things in themselves, uh, to what the thing is that I perceive, instead of some search for universal essences, universal givens, universal data. And Husserl, being schooled in mathematics and geometry, is not going to let go the veracity of universal data, the circle as such, the triangle as such, the square as such, uh, numerical meanings as such. There is a universality of these meanings around the world throughout the universe. It's not nominalism. It's not subjectivism. It's certainly not some epistemological or psychological relativism, but it is an objectivism of sorts, but not objectivism as a reductionism to the object out there as a transcendent datum of experience. We're looking at the relationship between the world that gives itself out there to in here, not producing a second world in here, but maintaining a unity of the human subject, of the knower, and the world, and the known, and the phenomena. So again, Husserlian phenomenology and the genealogy of this phenomenology is not phenomenalism. It's not a reductionism. It's not an idealist reductionism to ideas alone, um, in consciousness, as if these could be something else than the real phenomenon that gives itself. I also don't want to say that phenomenology is purely a realism, because that brings its ideological baggage to philosophy too. But phenomenology appreciates the circumference around and beyond the uh, searching for the adjective, the uh, oversimplified categories of realism and idealism. There's much greater things to debate than this more ideological, polemical, um, contrasting competition between idealism and realism. Again, it's an oversimplified way to talk about some different trends in philosophy, but for the search for truth, the search for wisdom, the search for the prize, the thing in itself, whether we're talking about metaphysics, what is it? Or we're talking about phenomenology, what gives? We bracket in phenomenology any natural attitude that brings this biased baggage, that brings these already predetermined lenses to look through. In phenomenology, we want to get back to raw, pure experience. And so this is why Husserl in his 1913 book, Ideas Pertaining to a Pure Phenomenology, is the title, and to a phenomenological philosophy, pure phenomenology. So philosophy is always pruning, always being purified. And to be purified is to be humiliated. It's to be humbled. Because when thought becomes proud, it doesn't see things as they give themselves, but it sees things as it wants them to see. For example, if we get into a debate with someone and we have a difference of opinion, we might be quick to try to find the sources to back our own opinion. But if we're really concerned about the truth of the question and we want to dare to lead with the question or come back to the question at hand, that's what philosophy does. What's the question again we're talking about? Not just what's the point I'm trying to get across. What is the question that both of us, that all of us are um, um, indebted to, beholden to, the accountable to, the open question, moving toward truth. This is philosophy. So um, we want to bracket ideology, whatever stripe. Yes, whether it's conservative, whether it's liberal, whether it's traditional or progressive. This is not the first question for us. The identity of the philosopher is not determined by by uh, some collective identity. The identity of the philosopher is not even determined by some self-made individual identity, a kind of individualism. Philosophy depends on the community of question askers, of teachers and learners. Philosophy depends on all this. But what it depends on above all is truth. And by truth, we mean clarity, precision, exactness, the real, not just calling a thing what it is, but we call a thing what it is because we first have received a thing for what it is, as it gives itself. Every science deals with data, and the word datum comes from Latin root, what gives itself. Philosophy is about a covenant relationship with the given, not an ideology, not a political program, not some kind of social status, but a humiliated confession of the limitations of the philosopher, a confession both of what gets in the way of clear philosophy, also a confession of thanksgiving and praise for the gift of the adventure to philosophize, to ask the questions once again. Um, and I think getting into these videos about givenness, for me, it's a topic that never gets old. And I ask the question once again, what is givenness? What is meant by givenness in phenomenology? Um, Not that I already have it down, but I'm still trying to take it in. I'm still trying to investigate what is this? What is meant by this? And that is when the adventure is very enlivened and animated, and we get real um, effervescence and movement and momentum in the philosophy. Okay, so again, Marion, based on what Husserl is talking about with givenness, givenness alone is absolute, free, without condition, precisely because, in German, es it gives, it gives it. So when we carry out the phenomenological reduction to givenness, we can't peel back the layers any further. We arrive at givenness, the givenness of the thing itself, of the phenomenon, and voilà, es gibt, uh, it gives. Now we are at the origin of experience, not as cause and effect, but as um, it's experience is the birth of experience in a perpetual way, a perpetual birth of experience, conception of experience, birth of experience, giving of experience. Um, I don't want to use the language of source. It sounds too metaphysical. Not source, not cause, um, not act in relation to potency. We'll talk about that in other videos. But in terms of origin, in terms of event, in terms of giving, what is this phenomenological shape of experience? Givenness signifies the process of experience by which a given phenomenon gives itself on its own accord. That's what phenomenology is getting. How? How does phenomenon X give itself as X? It refers both to the phenomenon given and to the advent of itself given. So Marion talks about the fold of givenness in his book Being Given. And the title of the book is very creative because because it gets at this fold. We know for sure he's not talking about being itself, being qua being, being as yeah, uh, being as essay in Latin or ens. Uh, it's gerunds in speech. It's verbal, being given. What's the accent is on given, being given, not being that gives itself as being. So Marion's going further than Heidegger in the Seinsfrage, really bracketing the language of being for the sake of giving. The giving is what's most decisive. Even for Heidegger, in many ways, um, the phenomenology of uh, being, of Sein, it's not so much about the Sein as it is about the Gegebenheit of Sein, the givenness of being, how being gives itself. So Marion, again, is thinking about this. So givenness, the fold of givenness, again, is the given phenomenon, but along the horizon of givenness. So the given phenomenon within the constant perpetual phenomenality of givenness. So given phenomena make up the field of givenness and give themselves uh, along this field. So that's the fold of givenness. Givenness itself and each and every particular given. Givenness traverses into the depths of phenomenality, passing beyond metaphysics, ontology, causality, conceptuality, Newman and phenomenon distinctions, objectivity and subjectivity. That's what I've been trying to get at. So givenness seeks to discover a phenomenon in its most raw and original form, essential form, perceiving the form that is perceived by the human subject, the forms that comprise the form, and the forms that continue to exceed the reductionism of the plethora of forms to the singularity of the phenomenon. For sure. So givenness, by way of the phenomenological reduction, attempts to behold the phenomenon without condition or contamination, without bias or projection, without assumption or mastery. That's the risk to run in entering the world of phenomenology. You have to give up control. You have to give up saying, "I'm master of what's going on here," or "I'm the adjudicator, I'm the judge." You have to divest of the judge's bench, the judge's gavel, I think it's called, hammer, the judge's uh, regalia, the judge's cloak, the judge's position in the room, and you have to go to the floor. You have to get off the chair, get off the high horse, and sit on the floor with the children. That's where they are. And that's why they discover so much. This is why the world of the child is populated with Givenness, with real phenomena of real lived experience, because of their vantage point from below. In some of my works, this book my wife and I published called Shoeless, Carmelite Spirituality in a Disquieted World, I talk about this theology of childhood. We can also talk about a philosophy of childhood, which has to do with this vantage point from below, this vantage point uh, within where all the action is happening. And sometimes, oftentimes in philosophy, we perch ourselves too high to notice what gives. Oh my goodness. Phenomenology as a method of philosophy begins with a conversion of the natural attitude. And it's a movement from higher to lower, because lower gives higher and higher gives lower. Um, it's a different point of view. And it's an attunement to experience, again, which brings back, like Merleau-Ponty says, it's a recovery of this naive contact with the world, and to give it at last a philosophical status because of all that is giving itself within that experience of the naive contact with the world. And so it's a paradox. It's not that me, the philosopher, I, the philosopher, the ego, reigning supreme, gives the given its status. Rather, it gives itself to me. And if I'm honest with myself and with the very structure of my own perception, if I'm honest with this all, then I have to admit I'm a poor porosity who happens to experience something. I'm a poor porosity. I'm poor. I don't bring anything from my conception onward. It's a gift from the start. I didn't elect to uh, go ahead and say it, exist, the metaphysical way of talking about it. But I didn't elect to cognize, philosophize. Um, I don't determine my um, teleological development from womb to tomb. I don't uh, get to choose what language I speak. I inherited it. I'm stuck with it. It's my mother tongue. Whether I like it or not, I can learn other languages, dabble in other languages, but I speak English. And so my senses don't make the world, they receive it. My cognition does not create the world and define it, but simply receives it. If I'm honest with my subjectivity, it is pure receptivity uh, within what we call experience. At least early on, it is primarily this. As we get older, our intentionality starts to uh, increase, take over in a way. So, again, for phenomenology, the intentionality of the human subject looks something like this. It's what's going out toward the phenomenon, toward the thing itself. This is intentionality, this blue arrow. As we get older, that blue arrow starts to become more prominent, and and I start to be Lord of the universe. The ego life begins in adolescence, for sure, to be convinced that the universe orbits around it. That singular ego life is at the center of the universe. And according to the theory of relativity, in some ways it is. Even as Edith Stein says, it is a 0 point of orientation for this particular human subject. But it is not, therefore, the featured attraction, the center of experience, but a point of reference. Seeing the ego not as Lord and Master of the universe, but a humble point of reference to the whole that envelops the ego. We must overcome this egomania sooner or later. And the phenomenological reduction is unmasking it, is calling it out, is calling a thing what it is in terms of the ego. You're getting too big for your britches. You're outgrowing the saddle of your high horse. You you are taking over the experience and leaving no room for anything else to give itself but your opinions, your um, very limited point of view. So good philosophy, and I hesitate to call it good. I want to say true philosophy, real philosophy, precise philosophy is not about um, peddling its own opinions. It's the difference in Greek. It's the difference between these two Greek concepts. Um, in philosophy, we're not meant to peddle our own opinions. That becomes ideology. That becomes celebrityism or something. But uh, philosophy is about managing the difference between, on one hand, doxa, which is opinion, uh, and uh, aletheia, which is truth. And how this is negotiated is episteme, the knowing subject between truth and opinion. Uh, Early on in this book, Dialectical Anatomy of the Eucharist, page 39, you have this diagram, a diagram about how truth gives itself all the way to the human subject through interpretation, through its witnesses, through an intentionality that goes to meet truth. But for phenomenology, the accent is on truth. So when we say phenomenon in phenomenology, this is to say we're trying to get at the truth of the matter, of the heart of the matter, the the phenomenological givenness of the phenomenon itself. And we have a reverence. Phenomenology has a reverence in how we do philosophy. We don't assume too much. We try not to let the ego get in the way of the receptivity because the ego in phenomenology is meant to be the servant of the Givenness of the phenomenon. Ego as servant, not master. Um, we might say that's a precarious place to be when you give the phenomenon so much sway over subjectivity. And this is again why I would say phenomenology itself, at the end of the day, has to confess that it does not comprise the fullness of philosophy. We need other approaches also. We need a symphony of methods to philosophize toward the whole best, including and especially classical metaphysics. And that's something else. We do need to make a judgment after all. So, phenomenology, when it does all it can with the phenomenological reduction, must allow itself, must allow the reduction to be exercised on itself. The phenomenological reduction must allow itself to be reduced. It can't reduce itself, so it must invite other philosophical methods to speak their piece, to share their insights for the philosopher. So the worst outcome of phenomenology would be to become convinced that it is the be all end all and that one can get away with doing phenomenology alone and call that adequate philosophy. If one attempts to do phenomenology alone, it will lead to la la land. And I'm saying that as a card carrying member phenomenologist. I'm going to talk further in upcoming videos about the question, why does phenomenology need metaphysics? Because the two don't seem to get along. Either one is a phenomenologist or a metaphysician. But we do see some thinkers of recent date who combine these two methods. Dietrich von Hildebrand, Edith Stein, Karol Wojtyła, Paul Ricoeur, Eric Chavara, Hedwig Conrad Martius, Hans von Balthasar, in his own way. There's many thinkers. Um, so I say that too as talking so energetic about phenomenology that it needs to get beyond its own uh, doxology in terms of its own limitations, its own limited phenomenological point of view. Um, so a proper doxology of philosophy will be a symphony of thought, a symphony of thought. Because as human beings, is this not what humanizes us all the more? And perhaps we get to theological questions, divinizes us. The cross pollination of things, of methods, of approaches, of insight. The non solum, said Etzion. This is a phrase of St. Thomas Aquinas. Not only uh, not only blank, but also the other. Not only the self, but also the other. Not only the question of givenness, but also the question of being. Not only the question of the human, but also the question of God. So, non solum sed etiam. One truth does not necessarily mean another truth because it's not the same one is not true. So, one truth does not make another truth. Um, out of bounds. Truth involves complementarity. Truth involves plurality and nevertheless unity. So when phenomenology itself um, says we do all we can here in phenomenology, and then we need to pass the baton to perhaps existentialism and its insights. Certainly classical metaphysics as philosophia perennis and its bedrock insights that always remain. Um, Perhaps analytic philosophy in its own way. What are its contributions and insights? What do we have to learn? So when we do philosophy, we don't have to think that I need to choose a side, I need to choose a team, I need to choose a party to be a part of, but rather philosophy remains perpetually open to the discourse, to the dialogue, to the conversations yet to be had, to the questions yet to be asked, as the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke talks about living to the questions. And philosophy needs to be perpetually open to a fuller resonance of truth within this realm of philosophical investigation and discovery. It's not to relativize the truth whatsoever, but it's to um, see. This is why sometimes writing is helpful. You get time to think about just the right word, but when you're on a live stream, you don't. Use the best that's coming to mind at the time. Uh, philosophy doesn't relativize truth. It's I want to think of counterpart term to relativize. You probably might be thinking of one. You can share it in the chat. Um, wow. Okay, we're getting some good chat here. Let me attend to the discussion board at this point, or the chat, because thank you all for the comments going. Um, and let me try to get up to speed on this. How is it possible to receive this immanent awareness of qualities in our consciousness without first having concepts that anticipate those qualities of things and make them intelligible to us? It's a great question. Um, I would say that when we're talking about qualities, it's already in the wake of the phenomenological giving. So if we're going to qualify what has given itself, it already gave itself. So to receive a phenomenon as it gives itself does not require in advance uh, having a palette of qualities ready to associate with every phenomenological essence. But again, the language we're used to talk about these things is simply uh, is simply um, before all the concepts, before all the qualifications, there's the purity of the gift. And let's take the example of a feeling of hope. A feeling of hope. Now, I've already betrayed the phenomenon in my description of it in a lot of ways. But what I feel as saying after the fact, I feel hopeful. We could try to describe it in different ways than say I feel hopeful. Uh, if I describe the lived experience of the hope breaking in, it's like I might use language of anticipation, excitement, uh, exuberance, confidence, um, uh, you know, and as I try to describe hope, I stammer because there's something I feel in the experience that is coming prior to the description. And all that I try to describe it, it helps get more precise, but still there's a hiddenness of the givenness that we never fully bring into the light, so to speak. That's how um, much, how generous givenness gives. Um, so okay, yeah. Thank you for the devil you don't. I like the screen name too. So intuitions without concepts are blind. Um, so be it. So be it. Uh, we're not. If I actually was blind, perhaps I receive more givenness. This is the paradox. If we want to reduce phenomena to a visual field or even a visual metaphor, we were already losing too much. So, yes, I may be describing the difference between being already involved in experience and reflecting on it. Yeah, yeah. So to be involved in an experience, the description is always belated. It's always late for the meeting. That's the language Levinas uses to talk about call of the other. When it comes to the originality of the call of the other, I'm always late for the meeting. It's beating me to the punch, so to speak. It's ahead of my curve, my curve to catch up. And so, yes, if we're to describe the phenomenality of experience, that it's something we never catch up to, and for sure we're never in front of. We recollect, we gather up the fragments of experience through phenomenology, but first comes givenness. Givenness awakens philosophy. Philosophy does not awaken givenness. Philosophy and phenomenology is uncovering step by step, gradually, what we mean by givenness. But givenness is a concept. And, again, taking Levinas, for example, he makes this distinction between the saying and the said, especially when talking about the ethical relationship and the call of the other. In French, the saying, le dire, the said, le dit. Philosophy is the said. It's what we say much after the saying happens, after the fact. But the saying, the originary, anterior saying, not in terms of cause and effect, but in terms of uh, the experience, the experience of experience. Like think of a Russian matryoshka doll, nesting dolls, where you have one inside the other. Phenomenology is trying to get into the original, the beginning of experience, not in terms of cause, but in terms of givenness. What gives first, the phenomenon or its interpretation? Phenomenon gives first. Yes. The genealogy of this phenomenology is very fascinating. So we'll continue to think about this together. And I just love this opportunity. Thank you all for joining the live stream today. And we'll continue to talk about givenness and Husserl, and then Heidegger, and then Marion. In the future, I hope to do more live streams on the topic of metaphysics, beginning with the topic of why does phenomenology need metaphysics? Why does metaphysics need phenomenology today? So let me know in the chat, in the comment section, if there's more topics you want to to explore together, because that's how I see this, is that we're going on an exploration together. And I can serve as a kind of tour guide, but there's going to be things that you recognize that I don't. And so that's the joy of the journey together. So I thank you all very much again for the exchange. Uh, and the candidness of comments, that helps us get at the truth, and prevent us from assuming too much as we go about philosophy. So may you continue to think toward the whole, to pray from the heart, and to live as witness. We'll see you on the next one.